Yeah, so salability is related to industries or locations. So there's no such thing as global salability. And that's why, for example, if you take a typical fiat currency like the Egyptian pound, it's highly saleable in Egypt. It's moderately saleable in neighboring countries, and it's virtually not saleable at all when you get out of that certain region. And so a given fiat currency is like a 10 out of 10 saleability in its own jurisdiction and like a 2 out of 10 elsewhere. And a couple of currencies like the dollar and the euro are 10 out of 10 in their own jurisdiction, and they still might be like 7 out of 10 in other jurisdictions. A gold coin might be 7 out of 10 everywhere. It doesn't really have a 10 out of 10 anywhere, but it's like 7 out of 10 almost everywhere. And Bitcoin's kind of like ranges probably between like a 3 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10 almost everywhere. So it's more saleable than many currencies outside of their own jurisdiction, but it doesn't have that like epicenter 10 out of 10 area of jurisdiction. But there could be certain industries where that can be different. And so one of the things we're seeing in the AI space is that AIs are getting sophisticated enough that they might want to do economic transactions. They might be given a task and realize that if they have an allowance to spend certain resources, they can decide what they should spend that allowance on in order to most efficiently or most cost effectively complete that task. And they might decide that they need certain API access. They might need certain extra processing power temporarily. And these are resources that can be made available to them if they're able to pay for it. And, it's hard for an AI to get a bank account. They don't really have a good credit history. Bankers don't really want to give them credit. There's all sorts of questions around that. But open source money is something that they can just use. They don't have to ask anyone's permission. It's permissionless. In addition, it can do microtransactions. It's programmable. It can be split up and sent to multiple things in parallel. There's all sorts of cool things you can do when you're an AI agent that thinks faster than a human and is just basically able to iterate with open source money. And so we've seen interesting things. There's the Fedi hackathon. Lightning Labs has made various tools to make it easier to pay in Lightning for automated agents. And so we're still obviously really early stages here. But it's getting interesting. And one of the really tangible examples is that, you can use ChatGPT with a subscription. But when you start thinking on a global scale, we go back to that, 160 different fiat currencies. And, let's say you're from Nigeria and you want to access it, and it's hard to get a dollar subscription. Whereas I've used apps where you can just ask a question for like a penny over Lightning. And you're not paying a subscription, you're just paying in real time. And you're able to do microtransactions in a way that fiat currencies like Visa, PayPal, these types of payment systems are not set up to do microtransactions. There's a minimum cost that's like 50 cents or more per transaction. And so they can't do penny transactions or 5-cent transactions, whereas you can with Bitcoin and Lightning. And so whether it's AIs interacting with each other real time or people that just want to kind of get like a piecemeal access to them, microtransactions are really useful, and Bitcoin makes that possible.
So I wonder if we could dig into that a little bit. Why this gap between transaction and settlement speeds led to why the money is broken today?
It's a good question. I think one example to go is you look at Argentina. They've had, I don't even know how many hyperinflations they've had in our lifetimes, but a number of them. And you think, why are people still working with that system? How can it be so bad? And people keep going back to it. And it's in large part because there's no alternative, or at least the past century and a half, there's been basically no alternative, because you've been in this environment. So for thousands of years, gold and silver were the main money, sometimes copper. You had bimetallic or trimetallic systems, depending on how much divisibility you needed, things like that. Basically gold and silver. And what they had in common was that transactions and settlements all moved at the speed of matter. And there were various proto-bankers that could abstract and make certain types of long-distance transactions more efficient, but you didn't have a ton of financial abstraction. However, starting with the adoption of the telegraph system in the 1850s and 1860s, and then into the rest of the 19th century, you had information be able to go around continents and around the world very quickly, roughly at the speed of light, while matter, of course, can't. And so transactions are as simple to do as Morse code. And so ever since 1866, when we had the cross-Atlantic telegraph cable, the first successful one, you could do intercontinental transactions, but of course you can't move gold that quickly. And so we've been in this kind of local maximum, you can call it, where transactions have been accelerated, settlements were not. And so fiat currencies and central banks kind of became the only game in town. And for the first half of that era, they were gold backed. But the problem was gold rarely ever had to move because you had such efficient netting of transactions. And one of the sources I referenced in the book was William Stanley Jevons' 1875 book, Money and the Mechanism of Exchange. And if you read it, it's surprisingly modern in its writing. Like it's a quite accessible book for what you'd expect written in 1875. But what it does is it chronicles the abstraction of the gold standard. So the first half of the book is actually kind of similar to Broken Money, where the author goes back in history, kind of examines where money came from, looks at different monetary technologies over time, talks about the shortcomings and challenges of coins, things like that, gets into the modern banking system. And then he starts talking about how increasingly centralized the banking system is. He says, okay, there's individual banks, and we can make that more efficient by having those banks talk to each other. So one account holder can send another account holder money without the banks really having to send gold, or maybe once a year they can settle any imbalances they have. And then you say, well, what if we take them and combine them into a central bank, and then we have that central bank can talk to a central bank in another country, so you can have this international netting. And the telegraph really made that increasingly possible. So the combination of paper instruments and telegraph, you could send transactions around the world, at least at the time the Western world and eventually the whole world, very efficiently. And gold rarely ever had to move. And so Jevons would talk about how the increasing efficiency of the system was remarkable. But he also warned that he's like, we have like 20 claims for gold for every ounce of gold in the system. And so we better hope that 5% of people don't want their gold back one day in normal banking hours, like they're promised to get, right? So he was both excited about the increasing efficiency of the system, but he also warned how if we don't manage the system well, this could result in catastrophic failure, which of course it did in World War I, World War II, when all that big, fragile musical chairs just ran into a brick wall of conflict and all the pegs broke and, currencies devalued. And eventually, the way the system works is it's so abstract, and we became increasingly reliant on fast payments. So credit card, the internet, mobile payments, things like that increased the need over time for always using fast payment systems, and gold and silver just don't cut it anymore. And so we've been in this environment where, for thousands of years, people moved up monetary technologies in terms of hardness. So they went from shells and beads and cocoa to gold and silver.